Leslie Hawke, tell us first of all, how did you come to Romania in the first place?
Well, purely by accident. I came as a Peace Corps volunteer when I was 48 years old. I'd spent my life in publishing business in New York City, and the company got sold to another company, and I felt like, oh, I don't know what I want to do right now. Why don't I take 2 years off, go into the Peace Corps, go somewhere in South America, and, you know, sit in the sun and try to do a little good. And they sent me here. And so that's how I wound up in Romania.
And what did you do on your first visit to Romania?
Well, it wasn't a visit. It was, you know, it was 2 years. It was a 2-year commitment. And the first thing we did, we were in Povești, and we lived in dorm rooms, you know. And then we were moved into homes with gazda, with people in the community. And so I spent 10 weeks trying to learn Romanian in Povești. And that's where I first saw these kids on the street who were begging. And I was really shocked. I wasn't expecting to see that in a country like this. I mean, I knew there were problems, and certainly wasn't hot water all the time, and there wasn't much in the stores, but I wasn't expecting to see kids on the street begging, and it really jarred me. And then when I got to Bacău, which is where they sent me, there were lots of kids hanging around during the day on the main street, you know, begging. And sometimes people would throw something at them, and sometimes people would give them money. But I was just really surprised. And you'd see these kids that looked like they were about 5 years old, sitting on some grass on a walkway in Bacău between the Orthodox Church and a big bank that probably had been built by the EU after the revolution. And it was just a little grassy area. And these kids would sit there with their hands out, and these people with briefcases, you know, going about their business, just ignored them. And that would never happen in New York City. I mean, older people, you know, people beg, but children don't beg, and they're not allowed to beg alone. And of course, later I learned that these kids weren't truly alone. There was an adult over somewhere, but not that you could see, because they, you know, they were more effective if they looked like they were alone. And they got quite a bit of, you know, quite a bit of money. But it's like, but, you know, what's going to happen to these kids when they get older? And are these kids in school? And I learned really soon that no, they're not in school. And they've got siblings who are home who also aren't in school. And I thought, they'll have terrible lives. You know, if this is their reality as a child, they haven't a chance when they become adults.
So you decided to do something about it?
Well, I don't know. It was like the situation decided to use me. You know, things happened. I met a kid named Alexandru, who was a street kid, and I took him to a shelter that the organization that I've been assigned to ran, and he loved it. He was really happy to be there, and I thought, wow, well, that was easy. And then 3 days later, three days later, his mother shows up, and she is furious. How dare you take my kid away? I've got 5 more kids, and they need to eat, and he's the one who's, you know, getting the food, and it's like, oh dear, this is complicated. And so we started at that. Then I should say, so we started. We started talking about what we could do, and we realized we had to help the families if we were going to help the kids at all. And fortunately, we were able to get a USAID grant, and with, I think it was $60,000, we started a program for 13 mothers and 30 kids. And the mothers program was fantastic. It was very hard work, but these women who had never been able to get a job, not even street cleaning, they wouldn't hire them as street cleaners because, you know, they look like gypsies. But if we vouched for them, and if they went through our training, which was pretty basic, you know, we trained them how to use cleaning products and how to behave and how you have to call if you're not going to be coming in that day, and, you know, all those basic things one needs to know. And some of those women are still cleaning the streets of Baku, and that was 2000. And their kids over the years have been seeing them go to work and, you know, think of themselves as that they will get a job someday. And they've gone through high school, not a lot, but there are, I don't know, maybe half a dozen kids that have actually graduated from high school. So of that first mother's group that we had. And it was 20 kids.
How did the fathers react?
Interesting question. We paid them to come to the training because I knew that, well, we couldn't just expect them to come, you know. And we required that their kids not beg. We would pay them if they came to the training, but they couldn't have their kids on the street begging. And the kids made a lot more than we paid them, but they did it. Not everybody, you know. Our first group, we had 13 women. And their husbands, you know, at first were skeptical, but they liked the fact they were bringing money home. And so they tolerated it. And then the women would get a job, and the women would be the breadwinner of the family. And they would want to, you know, they would expect to be heard, you know, their opinion to matter more.
They were empowered a little bit.
They absolutely were. And so we started hearing that they were like kicking their husbands out of the house or, you know, moving out of the house or something. And at first we were amused that this was happening. But then very quickly we saw this isn't a good option. They need their whole support network. And, you know, kicking the guy out is probably not the solution. So we brought them, we started bringing fathers in to come to meetings. Like, we had meetings every week, but maybe once a month. We'd have the husbands there too and talk to them. And it really broke my heart because these are guys that you see them on the street and, you know, they look pretty tough. And you get them into a meeting like that, and they talk about how they tried to get a job here, they tried to go to school, this happened. I mean, everything has kind of not gone their way in life. And I became really sympathetic with the men as well as the women. But they still beat their wives a lot. And that was hard.
Tell us a little bit about the world you grew up in. You grew up basically in the 60s during the civil rights movement.
I came from a family of people who, I wouldn't go so far as calling them activists, but they'd always been Democrats. They'd always been for equal opportunities and, you know, and better treatment. And they, even though they were from the South, they weren't racist. My father was in politics, and he and I would go to political rallies, and you know, like the black community. And I loved to go to the ones in the black community. And it was a very black and white separation in neighborhoods and everything. And it still to a large extent is, but here the blacks would congregate in precinct 11, and we'd go, and you know, the music was fantastic, the food was great. And I just found it so lively. I loved going with him to those places for political rallies. Actually, I liked going to all political rallies. I loved I like politics. I know everybody hates politicians, and but it's you know, it can be a noble thing to do.
Yeah, it is. It's in the service of the country. By the way, what do you think about the election results?
They won't change.
But what kind of change?
They don't care. That's it. I'm absolutely, that's it.
Can you tell us a little bit about the program, the kindergarten program? How did that start? So you realized that you had to go back before first grade, that you have to start as early as possible.
Well, Maria and I decided in 2007 that we would stay with this, and we had this model called Every Child in School. And we wanted to our goal was to get every child in Romania in school by 2020. Because, you know, the more we worked and the wider our net became, the more we realized what a huge national problem this is. And so we worked with communities to start programs. And at one point we tried using food coupons to see if, you know, if that would increase the kids' attendance, because these were kids actually in Dumovica who were jumping on a train and coming in and begging in Bucharest. And so that was an effort to get them to stay there. And it worked great, except it was a UNDP grant of $10,000, and, you know, it didn't last very long. But we'd come up with this food coupon notion, and then in 2010, when we decided that we just had to focus only on early education, because that was most critical, and nobody else was really looking at that. They were looking at after-school programs and second chance programs, but those would be great if the kids had started school when they were 3. You know, if they started in the system. But when the kid is 8 or 9 and starts first grade, and you're trying to catch him up to third grade level, an after-school program's not going to do that.
It's the first, I think, NGO program that is adopted by the authorities on a national scale. What were your expectations when that happened? I mean, what?
Well, we wanted that to happen by 2020.
It happened earlier.
And it happened much earlier, and it wasn't not our doing. We were trying to get Parliament to say that counties could allocate money. It was news to us when we learned that, oh, they want to do it everywhere. And we said, Maria said to the committee, there aren't enough classrooms, there aren't enough social workers, maybe you should roll this out more slowly. And they were like, no, we're going to do it everywhere. So the first few months we were kind of nervous about it. And we had to reorient our focus, because we weren't running the programs anymore, the government was. But we had a lot of additional elements like teacher training and providing school materials and stuff. So we just this past year have totally changed our orientation from running programs to being kind of a watchdog of programs.
I've once visited one of these kindergartens where your program, yes.
Where?
About in Dâmbovița, I think it was, yeah. And the thing that really struck me was the fact that these kids went to kindergarten and they didn't know colors.
Isn't that amazing?
It's the thing you take for granted, like walking and talking. Like, you just know colors, right? But no, they're taught.
They didn't know colors. I know. That was the thing that when we first started working with preschoolers that really, really surprised me. Actually, Alex, the first kid that I took to a shelter, I was still trying to learn Romanian, and I asked him what that color was, because I was going to talk about something that was yellow. And he didn't know. And he was 8 years old. And I was like stunned, but he'd never been to school. Nobody told him yellow. He probably knew green, or probably knew the color of bills. You know? And he could count. He could count.
But he couldn't recognize
But he didn't know
colors.
colors. Wow. Yeah, we have to, almost everything we have to learn. And the better teaching, the more attention we're given, the better we flourish. And these kids aren't flourishing because they're not getting much attention. It's not because their parents don't love them. It's because their parents don't know what they're supposed to be doing. Yeah. And the mothers are mostly very depressed and anemic and, in bad shape.
Looking back over the past 17 years since you've been here, what do you think are the most important, life lessons you've learned? What are the things you realized through your work here? That you realized about life, about people?
Gosh, it's been extremely educational being here. I think it sounds so simplistic, but that, you know, people are people, and basically we've got so much more in common than different.